Welcome to DIY Man, where today I'm going to show you how to build these really cool cabinet doors. No expensive tools needed. We're going to be using a table saw and a miter saw.
The best part about this door design is that it's actually two designs in one. The side which you'll see me use is actually kind of more of a shaker style, but if you flip it over you can have more of a raised panel if you like that look better.
Let's get building.
Once again, I did use walnut for this, so my dimensions are a little bit different, but I did cut the lumber up into 1x4 dimensions. The only difference is that my lumber is actually 1 inch thick instead of 3/4 of an inch. So if you use 3/4 inch material, make sure you make adjustments accordingly. These 1x4s, as we're calling them, are going to make up the stiles and the rails for our cabinets. And these are going to be the most crucial part of our build, so that's why I wanted to explain that a little bit. Now, I do recommend that you build all your cabinet doors at one time after the cabinets are already built. But for the sake of this video, I'm only going to show you how to do one today. But once you understand how to do it, you can really go into production mode. The first step in building great cabinet doors is to figure out what size of overlay you need. That means how much do you want your cabinet door to overlap the opening. For this video, I chose to do a 1/2 inch overlay. Just be aware there are other sizes, so make sure you choose the correct hinges for the overlay you're after. Here's a picture of the hinges I bought. So for today, I have an opening that's 21.5 inches long and 12 3/4 inches wide. That means I need a door that's 22.5 inches long and 13 3/4 inches wide. Since we know the length of the door we need, let's cut two 1x4s to 22.5 inches long. Now we know we need a door that's 13 3/4 inches wide, and those outside stiles are 3.5 inches each. That means that inside portion needs to be 6 3/4 of an inch. For the upper and lower rail, we need to add 1/4 of an inch to each side. You'll see why in just a little bit. So 6 3/4 plus 2/4, we need to cut two 1x4s that are 7 1/4 inch. Let's set up our table saw. First, let's set the blade height to 1/4 of an inch. Now let's set the inside edge of the saw blade 1/4 of an inch from the fence. Next, we'll send one side of all 4 of these boards through the table saw. Now set the outside edge of your saw blade 1/2 inch from the fence. Leave the blade height 1/4 of an inch. Let's send all these boards back through. Make sure they're facing the same way as the first time you cut them. All these boards should have a really small sliver of wood left in them. This should be really easy to get out with a small flathead screwdriver, but you can send it back through the table saw if you need to. Leave your blade height at 1/4 of an inch and set the outside edge of the blade 1/4 of an inch from the fence. Let's take the upper and lower rail and send the left and right side through. Make sure the 1/4 inch edge is up against the fence. Let's adjust the table saw just a little bit more. We need the outside edge of the blade 1/2 of an inch from the fence now. The height will still stay 1/4 of an inch. Now let's do the exact same thing to the 1/2 inch sides of the rails. To finish up the rails, let's set the saw blade to where it'll just barely cut those ears off the left and right sides. We'll trim those off by laying these down flat and sending them through. You'll have to raise the blade height a little bit to get that 1/2 inch side. Now comes the fun part. Let's work on the center sections of these cabinet doors. These are called the panels. Based on what we can see, we need a panel that's 15.5 inches long and 6 3/4 inches wide. But for these, we also need to add a 1/4 inch to each side. So because of that, these will be 16 inches long and 7 1/4 inches wide. Let's go ahead and cut out the piece of wood we need to make this panel. Just keep in mind, if you're making really big cabinet doors, you may have to glue 2 pieces together. To set up your table saw for these cuts, we'll need to turn the blade to a 45-degree angle. Set your blade height so it will leave a 1/4 inch when your panel's laying flat. Now set your blade 1/4 inch from the fence. You really want to test this on a scrap piece before you start cutting all your panels out. As you can see, by setting your blade to a 1/4 inch, it's going to give you a little bit of extra space here. That's good, that'll give you a little extra play. This measurement, on the other hand, I want it as close to 1/4 inch as I possibly can. If it's too big, it won't fit properly. If it's too small, it'll be too loose and the cabinet door could fall apart. Now we can run all our cabinet door panels through the table saw. Make sure you do all 4 edges, but please only do one side. In addition to cutting out all your panels, go ahead and cut out one scrap piece as well. Now set your blade height back to a 1/4 inch and set the inside of your saw blade 1/4 inch from the fence. Here's that scrap piece I was talking about. I send it through one time, and if it doesn't cut all the way through, I incrementally raise the saw blade. If you see a little strip of wood on the inside edge there, just keep raising it just very minimally and run it through again until that notch is completely gone. Then test it out on the other sides. Once you're happy with the way that looks, you're ready to cut out your panels. Sometimes you might still see like a really small thin strip. That should come off with your fingernail or some really light sanding. Looks good, doesn't it? Let's sand all these pieces before putting them together. I used an 80 then a 120 grit sandpaper. Now we'll take a little bit of wood glue and join these together. Make sure your outside edges are as even as possible when you're joining these. Then you'll clamp your door and let it sit overnight. I like to give the doors another good sanding once they're assembled and dried. Now comes a tough decision. Do you want a raised panel or do you want more of a shaker style? Now this panel does stick up about a 1/4 inch past the rails and stiles, and this panel is inset a 1/4 inch. I'm choosing the recessed panel for this project. Whichever design you choose, now's a good time to router the edges if you like that. I'm going for a more traditional looking cabinet door, so I'm going to leave them just the way they are. I don't want to beat a dead horse, just make sure you choose the correct overlay when you buy your hinges. Also, I really recommend getting one of these hinge installation kits. They cost less than $15 and it's a lot easier to attach your hinges. Make sure you test this out before doing the real thing. I pre-drilled my holes with a really small bit before using the big one. I don't think I have to say this, but please don't drill all the way through your cabinet doors. Ah, it's so nice not to have to stain. All I have to do is put a couple clear coats on. Now this is just personal preference, but I usually remove these little dowel plugs when I'm using these hinges. I typically use those stubby little screws to attach them to the door. If something ever happens and they strip out, you can always come back and install these plugs later on. Now just install your hinges. Now it's time to attach these to the cabinet. Thanks for watching DIY Man today. Be sure to subscribe so you can keep track of these cabinet builds and see some new upcoming projects.